If you lived in the Ottoman Empire in 1850, which law would kill you first? You wake up in a city of minarets and market noise. The smell of bread and charcoal. A muezzin calls from a tower nearby. You open your eyes and you are not sure, exactly, who you are supposed to be today. Because in the Ottoman Empire in 1850, who you are determines everything. What you can own. Where you can live. Whether your testimony is worth anything in a court of law. Whether you can ride a horse through certain streets. Whether the color of your shoes is, technically, a criminal offense. You think that is an exaggeration. It is not. The Ottoman Empire at its peak controlled 3 continents. It stretched from the gates of Vienna to the Persian Gulf, from the plains of Hungary to the deserts of North Africa. For 6 centuries, it was the largest and longest-lasting Islamic empire in history. At its height, roughly 35 million people lived under its laws. But which laws applied to you depended entirely on a system that Europeans in 1850 were just beginning to understand and that most modern people have never heard of. It was called the millet system. Millet is an Arabic and Ottoman Turkish word meaning nation or community. But in Ottoman usage, it did not refer to a geographic nation the way we use the word today. It meant a religious community with its own internal legal structure, its own courts, its own administrative leadership existing inside the empire but governed, in many personal matters, by its own rules. The empire was not one law applied to everyone. It was a stack of parallel legal worlds, each with its own ceiling and floor. So which law would kill you first? That depends on which world you were born into. Let us say you are a Greek Orthodox Christian living in Istanbul, which the Ottomans called Constantini, the city of Constantine. You belong to the Rum Millet, the Greek community officially recognized under Patriarch Gennadios Scholarios, appointed by Sultan Mehmed II himself after the conquest of Constantinople in 1453. Your births, marriages, divorces, and inheritance disputes are handled not by Ottoman Islamic courts but by your own patriarchate. You pay a special tax called the jizya, a head tax on non-Muslims that grants you protected status under Islamic law as a dhimmi, a word meaning protected person. You cannot carry weapons. You cannot build new churches taller than existing mosques. And in certain periods, you cannot wear the color green, because green is the color of the Prophet. Is your situation oppression? Is it tolerance? Historians have debated this for generations. Stanford Shaw, in his landmark study of Ottoman history published in 1976, argued that the millet system granted minority communities a degree of self-governance almost unparalleled in the contemporary Christian world, where Jews were being expelled from Spain and France was burning heretics. Halil İnalcık, the great Turkish historian who devoted his career to Ottoman economic and social history, described the system as a deliberate architecture of coexistence, not equality, but structured survival. Others point to the tax burdens and legal disabilities and call it institutionalized subordination. The truth, as always, is that it depends on which year you are living in and which province you are standing in. Now let us say you are not Greek. Let us say you are a Muslim man from Anatolia, newly arrived in Istanbul in 1850. You are, on paper, in the dominant category. You do not pay the jizya. You can testify in court without your word being automatically discounted. You can in theory hold government office. But 1850 is a very specific and turbulent year in Ottoman history, and the empire you have arrived in is not the empire of Suleiman the Magnificent. It is an empire in crisis. By 1850, the Ottoman state had been bleeding territory for decades. Greece had won independence in 1830, after a brutal war that shocked European capitals. The Russo-Turkish Wars had handed Russia enormous strategic advantages, including access to the Black Sea Straits that controlled the flow of grain from Ukraine to the Mediterranean. The empire that had once terrified Vienna was now being called, in European diplomatic correspondence, the sick man of Europe, a phrase attributed to Tsar Nicholas I of Russia in an 1853 conversation with the British ambassador, though the sentiment had been circulating for years before anyone put a name to it. The Ottoman response to this crisis was the Tanzimat. That is a Turkish word meaning reorganization. The Tanzimat was a sweeping series of legal and administrative reforms, launched in 1839 with the Hadi Sharif of Gulhane, the Imperial Edict of the Rose Chamber, and continued through the 1850s and 1860s. The edict promised, in writing, security of life, honor, and property for all Ottoman subjects regardless of religion. It was the closest thing the empire had yet produced to a constitution. And it was, in the eyes of the reforming bureaucrats who drafted it, a survival mechanism. Reform or be absorbed by European powers who were circling the empire's weakening edges. So in 1850 you are standing inside a paradox. The old law says one thing. The new law says another. And often, no one in your local court is entirely sure which one applies. Let us recreate one of your days. You are a merchant. You sell cloth. You operate out of a covered bazaar, the kind of market that historian Soraya Faroqi, one of the foremost scholars of Ottoman social life, described as a city within a city, a microeconomy with its own credit systems, guild hierarchies, and dispute resolution mechanisms that operated largely independent of the state. You have a partner. He is Armenian. You are Turkish Muslim. Under the old system, his testimony against you in an Islamic court was worth less than yours, by default, because he was a non-Muslim. Under the Tanzimat reforms, that was supposed to change. Under the 1856 Reform Edict, the Hadai Humayun, all subjects were theoretically equal before the law, regardless of religion. Theoretically. In practice, the local qadi, that is the Islamic judge who administers Sharia law in your district, still operates under a system he has followed his entire career. Reform edicts arrive from Istanbul. They are read aloud in the main square. They are then, in many provinces, quietly filed away. The gap between what the law says in the capital and what happens in the village is not a gap. It is a canyon. Now let us go further. Let us say you are not a merchant. Let us say you are a woman. If you are a Muslim woman in 1850, your legal identity exists almost entirely through your relationship to male guardians. You can own property under Islamic law. This is actually more than many European women of the same era could say. French women would not have full legal property rights until 1938. English women were only beginning to win them. But in the Ottoman court, your testimony in most cases counts as half of a man's. Your inheritance share is half of your brother's. Divorce is accessible to your husband by the simple utterance of a phrase, talaq, meaning I divorce you, while your own path to legal dissolution of a marriage is narrow, expensive, and humiliating. You depend on a wali, a male legal guardian, for major transactions. And the reforms of the Tanzimat, which spoke of equality and security, said almost nothing about you. What would kill you first? Not a sword. Not a soldier. The slow attrition of a legal structure designed to define you as a dependent rather than a person. But here is the counterintuitive twist that the official histories often skip over. In the same city, in the same year, there were women who ran entire commercial empires through male proxies. There were Armenian women who controlled family banking operations that stretched from Istanbul to Vienna. There were Greek women who administered church property worth fortunes. The gap between what the law permitted and what daily life actually looked like was not always what you would expect. Ivan Sang, a scholar who studied Ottoman court records from the 16th and 17th centuries, found that women appeared in Istanbul property cases at rates that suggest active economic participation far beyond what the formal legal structure implies. The law was a ceiling. Resourceful people found ways to build below it. And then there is the final twist. The one that makes 1850 the hinge year. In 1856, just a few years after the moment you are standing in, the Ottoman Empire will issue the Hadai Humayun, the most radical reform edict in its history, under direct pressure from Britain and France following the Crimean War. It will promise full legal equality for all subjects. It will abolish the jizya tax. It will theoretically open government positions to non-Muslims. European powers will call it progress. Many Muslims within the empire will call it a betrayal of 6 centuries of Islamic law. The reforms will accelerate the fracturing of the millet system, the very framework that had, however imperfectly, given communities a structured place in the imperial order. And here is what history tells us: the dismantling of that system, without a replacement that communities trusted, did not produce equality. It produced competition. Ethnic and religious communities that had coexisted under a structured inequality began competing for territory, power, and survival in a rapidly collapsing empire. The massacres of Armenians later in the century, the Greek-Turkish population exchanges of 1923, the slow unraveling of a multi-ethnic order, these are not simply stories of ancient hatred. They are stories of what happens when a legal architecture that organized difference is removed faster than trust can fill the gap. The law that would have killed you first in 1850 was not any single article of the Ottoman legal code. It was the moment between legal systems. The moment when the old rules no longer protected you and the new rules had not yet arrived. You live in that moment too. Not in a bazaar in Istanbul. Not under a Cutty's ruling. But every time a legal system you depended on changes faster than the communities it governed can adapt, you are standing in the same canyon. The name of the empire changes. The shape of the problem does not. You woke up this morning not entirely sure which rules apply. In 1850 Istanbul, so did everyone else.